My wife died last year, leaving me her cherished locket. My greedy son-in-law sold it for peanuts, sneering. It's just trash, old man. A few days later, the buyer called. Your wife hid something incredible inside. You need to see this right now. What I discovered made everyone freeze in shock. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Theodore Bishop. I'm 68 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. Spent 35 years teaching history at Portland Community College before I retired 4 years ago. I always believed that understanding the past helps us navigate the present. Turns out I should have paid more attention to the warning signs in my own life. Portland's been my home since 1982. The house on Hawthorne Boulevard where I live, a 2-story craftsman built in the 60s, used to be filled with laughter. Now it just echoes with tension and barely concealed contempt. Let me tell you about my daughter Stephanie. 35 years old, works as a dental hygienist. She wasn't always the person she is now. I remember when she was 7, sitting on my lap while I read her stories about ancient civilizations. Her eyes would light up at tales of Egyptian pharaohs and Roman emperors. She'd ask questions that showed real curiosity, real warmth. That girl disappeared 6 years ago when she married Jared Cox. Jared, even his name leaves a bitter taste. 37, works as a mid-level manager at some tech startup downtown. The kind of guy who talks big about disrupting industries, but never seems to actually produce anything of value. He's got that polished look, expensive haircuts, designer jeans, always checking his phone like he's expecting a call from someone important. Spoiler, he never is. 6 years ago, when Stephanie brought him home for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that bothered me, a calculating coldness behind the charming smile. But what could I say? My daughter was in love, or what she thought was love. The change in Stephanie happened gradually, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. First year of marriage, she'd still call me weekly. Second year, the calls became monthly. By year 3, she only contacted me when they needed something, and they always needed something. 4 years ago, they moved into my house. Just temporarily, Jared said with that smile that never reached his eyes, until we saved for our own place. The rent we agreed on was $400 a month. I knew that was barely a quarter of market rate. Comparable places in the neighborhood go for $2,100 or more. But Stephanie was my daughter. Family helps family, right? That's what I told myself every month when the utilities remained in my name. Every time Jared left his expensive running shoes in the middle of the hallway like he owned the place. Every time he'd interrupt my reading with some condescending comment about old people and their books. A year ago, my wife, Eleanor, passed away. Cancer. It took her quickly, which I suppose was a mercy. She left me her locket, an old silver piece that had belonged to her grandmother. Nothing fancy, just a simple oval with worn engravings. But it was the only thing I had left of her, the only physical reminder that someone had actually loved me in this house. I kept it in a wooden box on my dresser. Sometimes I'd hold it, running my thumb over the smooth metal, remembering Eleanor's smile. That morning, it was a Tuesday, middle of February, I came downstairs to find Jared in the kitchen, pouring himself coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. He was dressed for work, checking something on his phone with that self-satisfied smirk he always wore. "Morning," I said, heading for the coffee pot. He didn't look up. "Hey, old man. Need to talk to you about something." The casual disrespect in his voice, calling me old man instead of Theodore or even just Ted, had become so normal I barely reacted anymore. That's how insidious it was. They'd trained me to accept it. "What is it?" I poured my coffee, noticing he'd used the last of the cream, without leaving any for me. Classic Jared. "So Steph and I are taking a trip to Paris next month. Been planning it for a while." He finally looked up from his phone, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. "Anyway, we were a little short on the travel fund, so I sold that old locket of yours. Got $450 for it from some antique dealer on Pearl District. Not bad for a piece of junk, right?" The coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "You did what?" "The locket. Sold it yesterday." "Come on, don't make that face. It was just sitting there collecting dust. You need to move on anyway. Eleanor's been gone a year now. Time to let go of the past." I felt something crack inside my chest. That wasn't yours to sell, Jared, he shrugged. That infuriating casual shrug. We live here, don't we? It's basically community property. Besides, it's not like you were doing anything with it. Just sitting in your room being sad. This is better. We're making memories in Paris. Real memories, not just staring at old metal. Where's Stephanie? My voice came out flat, controlled. I'd learned over the years that showing emotion around Jared only made things worse. At work. She knows about it, by the way. She agreed it was a good idea. That hurt more than anything. My daughter, my little girl who used to cry when she accidentally stepped on ants, had approved selling the last piece of her mother I had left. Jared stood up, rinsed his cup, not bothering to put it in the dishwasher, and grabbed his jacket. Look, I get it. You're upset. But honestly, Theodore, you need to stop living in the past. It's just stuff. Material things. What matters is living life, you know? Making experiences. He headed for the door, then paused and looked back at me. Oh, and the rent this month might be a little late. Spent a bit more on the trip than planned, you understand. The door closed behind him. I stood there in my own kitchen, in my own house that I'd paid off 15 years ago, holding a coffee cup with shaking hands. It was just stuff, he'd said. Material things. But it wasn't the metal I cared about. It was what it represented. It was Eleanor's touch, her history, her love. And they'd sold it for a vacation in Paris like it meant nothing. I set down the coffee cup very carefully, afraid I might throw it. That afternoon, when Stephanie came home from work, I tried to talk to her. She was in the living room, scrolling through Paris hotel options on her laptop. Stephanie, we need to discuss the locket. She didn't look up. Dad, please don't start. Jared explained everything. Explained what? That he stole from me? Now she looked up, and her eyes had that defensive glint I'd come to know so well. He didn't steal. We asked to borrow money for the trip, and you said no. So we found another solution. The locket was just sitting there. Mom would have wanted us to be happy. Don't. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Don't you dare speak for your mother. Dad, you're being dramatic. It's just a piece of jewelry. You've got plenty of other stuff to remember her by. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. When had she become so callous? When had Jared's poison seeped so deep that she could justify this? Get out, I said quietly. She blinked. What? I said, get out of my house. Both of you. I want you gone. For the first time in months, I saw real emotion on her face. Fear. Dad, you can't be serious. Where would we go? That's not my problem. You have 30 days. I walked upstairs before she could respond, before the tears I'd been holding back could fall. Behind me, I heard her calling Jared. Her voice panicked. Good. Let them panic. Let them feel an ounce of what I felt. But as I sat on my bed, staring at the empty wooden box where the locket used to rest, I knew 30 days wasn't enough. They'd weasel their way back in, or Stephanie would cry, or I'd cave like I always did. No. This required something different, something smarter. I just didn't know yet what that would be. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jared smirk, heard his casual dismissal. Just stuff, old man. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my study. This room had always been my sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, my old leather chair that Eleanor had given me for my 50th birthday, the desk where I'd graded thousands of essays over the years. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. Not a rant, not an angry letter, a timeline. 6 years ago, Jared and Stephanie married. He'd been charming at the wedding, making toasts about family and future. I remembered dancing with Stephanie, her in that white dress, telling me how happy she was. He's the one, Dad, she'd whispered. He takes care of me. What I didn't see then, what I refused to see, was how he monopolized her time during the reception, how he'd steered her away whenever I tried to have a longer conversation, how his hand on her back was less affection and more control. 5 years ago, they asked to move in temporarily. I was foolish enough to believe it. Jared had spun this story about a startup investment that didn't pan out, how they needed to rebuild their savings. 6 months, tops, he'd promised. Eleanor had been hesitant. I remember the conversation we'd had in this very room. There's something off about him, Theo, she'd said, sitting in the chair across from me. The way he talks to Stephanie. Did you notice at dinner how he corrected her 3 times? He's just particular. I defended him. Why? Why had I defended him? No, Eleanor had said firmly. He's controlling, and Stephanie's changing. She doesn't laugh the same way anymore. I dismissed her concerns, told her she was reading too much into it. 3 months later, Eleanor was diagnosed. 6 months after that, she was gone, and I never got to tell her she was right. 4 years ago, the first time Jared openly disrespected me, we were having dinner. I'd cooked pot roast, Eleanor's recipe, and Jared made a comment about old people food being too heavy. Then he ordered pizza without asking anyone else what they wanted. Stephanie had just laughed nervously. Jared likes things his way. That's when it started. The small cuts, the casual cruelty, always wrapped in jokes or concern. You're getting forgetful, Theodore. Maybe you should see a doctor. Still reading those dusty books? Must be nice having nothing better to do. Why don't you get out more? This house is depressing. Each comment alone was nothing, but accumulated over months and years, they became a weight that made me question myself. Was I too old? Too stuck in the past? Too boring? The manipulation was so gradual, I didn't recognize it as abuse. Because that's what it was, I realized sitting there at 3 a.m. Financial abuse, living in my house for a quarter of market rent. Emotional abuse, the constant belittling. And now theft. I thought about my years teaching history. How many times had I taught about people who seized power through slow erosion of boundaries? Jared had done exactly that. Tested limits, found I didn't enforce them, pushed further. The locket was just the latest transgression, but it was also the clearest. Even Stephanie couldn't spin it as anything other than what it was. I made more coffee as dawn broke. Tuesday morning, Jared would be at work. Stephanie too. The house was mine for the day. First, I called my bank, changed all my passwords, verified my accounts. I'd been careless. They had access to too much, no more. Then I did something I'd never done before. I went into their bedroom. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with. In Jared's nightstand, I found credit card statements showing charges at expensive restaurants, designer clothing stores, electronic shops, thousands of dollars, while they'd been pleading poverty to justify the $400 rent. In Stephanie's drawer, buried under scarves, I found something that made me sit down hard on their bed. A letter from Eleanor, written months before she died. It was addressed to Stephanie. My darling girl, I'm worried about you. Jared is not who you think he is. I've seen the way he speaks to you when he thinks no one's listening, the way you've started apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Please talk to your father, or talk to someone. You deserve better than this. Love, Mom. Stephanie had never mentioned this letter, had never acted on Eleanor's concerns. She'd chosen Jared's version of reality over her dying mother's warning. I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. Then I went to my study and called a lawyer. The receptionist connected me to Gerald Matthews, a family law attorney. I explained the situation, keeping emotion out of it, just facts. The symbolic rent, the theft of property, the financial documentation I'd found. Mr. Bishop, Gerald said after I finished, you're well within your rights to evict them. Oregon law requires 30 days' notice for month-to-month tenancy. But I need to ask, are you certain? This is your daughter. That's exactly why I'm certain, I replied, because she's my daughter, and I've enabled her to stay in an abusive relationship by making things too comfortable. Maybe this is the push she needs. We scheduled a consultation for later that week. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Jared thought I was a pushover, a relic. Someone who'd just accept whatever treatment they dished out. He'd made a critical miscalculation. He assumed that quiet meant weak. 35 years of teaching had taught me patience, how to plan, how to see the long game, how to read people and understand their motivations. I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Every late rent payment, every unpaid utility bill, the locket theft. I'd get a written statement from the antique dealer, the credit card statements I'd photographed with my phone. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I could legally record any interaction I had with them. I ordered a small recording device online, overnight shipping. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. This wasn't going to be dramatic. It was going to be systematic, documented, and absolutely legal. Around noon, my phone rang. The antique dealer, Margaret Holland, according to the business card Jared had left carelessly on the kitchen counter. "Mr. Bishop, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to speak with you about the locket your son-in-law sold me." "He's not my son-in-law," I said automatically, then caught myself. "I mean, yes, technically he is, but he had no right to sell that piece. It belonged to my late wife." There was a pause. I was afraid of that. "Mr. Bishop, I think you should come to my shop. There's something you need to see. It's about the locket. Something inside it." My heart started beating faster. "Inside it? I can't explain over the phone. Can you come today? It's important." I grabbed my jacket. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I drove to Pearl District, my mind was racing. Something inside the locket. Eleanor had worn it for years. I'd held it countless times after she died. What could possibly be inside that I hadn't seen? Margaret Holland's shop was exactly what you'd expect from a Pearl District antique dealer. Elegant, curated, expensive-looking items displayed with artistic precision. She met me at the door, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and gentle hands. "Mr. Bishop, thank you for coming so quickly." She led me to a back room, where the locket sat on a velvet cloth under a bright lamp. "I was examining it this morning for authentication purposes. The craftsmanship is exceptional, late 1800s, possibly European. But watch this." She picked up the locket with careful fingers and pressed a nearly invisible seam on the side. A tiny compartment popped open, so small I'd never have found it without knowing exactly where to look. Inside were 2 folded pieces of paper, yellowed with age, and a tiny note in Eleanor's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded them, and everything changed. The note was written in Eleanor's precise handwriting, the script I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for decades. But these words hit differently. "Theo, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Forgive me for keeping this secret. I was born Eleanor Fitzgerald. My grandmother left me property in 1987, but I never wanted money to define us. Our life together was richer than any inheritance. Now it's yours. Use it wisely. All my love, E." I read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Eleanor Fitzgerald. In all our years together, she'd never mentioned the Fitzgerald name, never hinted at wealth or property. Margaret was watching me carefully. "There are 2 other documents, Mr. Bishop. I didn't read them. They're sealed. But they appear to be legal papers." I unfolded the first one with trembling fingers. It was a property deed, official and notarized, dated April 14th, 1987. The language was dense legalese, but certain phrases jumped out. "Commercial property, 4,200 square feet, 518 Southwest Morrison Street, Portland, Oregon. Grantor, Margaret Fitzgerald. Grantee, Eleanor Fitzgerald." The second document was a bank certificate for a deposit account, also from 1987. Initial deposit, $47,000. "This can't be real," I whispered. "I think it is," Margaret said gently. "That address, Morrison Street, downtown, that's prime real estate, has been for decades." She paused, then added quietly, "If this is legitimate, Mr. Bishop, you're looking at property worth over $1 million, possibly closer to 1.5. The room tilted slightly. I sat down hard in the chair behind me. $1 million, maybe more, hidden in a locket that Jared sold for $450 to fund a vacation. The irony was so sharp, I almost laughed. Almost, because along with the shock came something else, a cold, crystalline clarity. "Your son-in-law had no idea, did he?" Margaret asked. "He's not—" I stopped myself. "No. He thought it was worthless. Trash. That's what he called it. Just trash from a dead woman." Margaret's expression hardened. "Mr. Bishop, I need to be honest with you. When he brought this in, I offered him $800. He insisted on $450 because he needed the money immediately for a flight upgrade. He actually laughed about it, said you'd never notice it was gone because you were too senile to remember what you owned." The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have devastated me. Now they just fueled the cold fire building in my chest. "I see," I said calmly. "And these documents, How do I verify them? You'll need a real estate attorney and a notary. I can recommend Richard Bennett. He's helped me authenticate estate documents before. But Mr. Bishop, I should warn you. If this property has been sitting unclaimed since 1987, there may be complications. Tax liens, title disputes, that sort of thing. I understand. Thank you, Ms. Holland, for everything. She handed me the locket and its contents carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry about your wife, but I think she would be pleased that you found this, especially now. The drive home took 30 minutes. I spent every second of it thinking. Jared thought he'd won. Thought he'd broken me, sold off my sentimentality, proven that I was weak and defeated. He was probably already bragging to Stephanie about it, making jokes about the old man's junk. But he'd made a critical error. He'd assumed the locket's value was only sentimental. He'd assumed I'd never find out what he'd done, and most importantly, he'd underestimated me. When I got home, the house was empty. Both of them at work, living their lives in my house, on my dime, with absolute confidence that nothing would ever change. I went straight to my study and locked the door. Then I spread the documents out on my desk and read them again, and again. Each time, more details emerged. The property was registered to Eleanor Fitzgerald Bishop. She'd added my last name when we married, but kept her maiden name on the deed. Smart. The bank certificate had accrued interest over the years. That $47,000 was probably worth considerably more now. Over the next few days, I became a different person. Or maybe I became who I should have been all along. I watched Jared differently now. Every condescending comment, every eye roll, every time he left his dishes in the sink for me to clean. I cataloged it all. Not with hurt or resignation, but with cold observation. He came home late one evening, talking loudly on his phone about the Paris trip. Yeah, man, upgraded to business class. Scored some extra cash. No, don't worry about it. Just liquidated some assets. He laughed at his own joke, not knowing I was in the next room. Liquidated some assets. He meant my wife's locket. He'd turned her memory into airline points. Stephanie was harder to watch. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the daughter I'd raised. She'd pause at Eleanor's photograph in the hallway, touch the frame gently. But then Jared would call her, and she'd transform. Become smaller, more defensive. That Friday they went out to dinner. Expensive place downtown. I saw the reservation confirmation on the printer they'd commandeered in my study. $200 minimum. Meanwhile, they still owed me 2 months of proper rent. I made myself dinner, just pasta and sauce, and ate alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet, peaceful almost, without their presence filling it with tension. And that's when it struck me. I didn't want them to just leave. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd lost, what they'd thrown away, the magnitude of their mistake. The next morning I called the number Margaret had given me. A man answered on the second ring. Bennett Notary Services, Richard speaking. Mr. Bennett, my name is Theodore Bishop. Margaret Holland from Pearl District Antiques recommended you. I have some estate documents that need authentication. Of course, Mr. Bishop. What kind of documents are we talking about? A property deed from 1987 and a bank certificate. My wife passed away last year, and I recently discovered these among her effects. I need to know if they're legitimate and what steps I need to take. I see. Can you bring them to my office? I'm free the day after tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I'll be there. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Jared and Stephanie's room. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to understand what I was dealing with, who they really were when they thought no one was watching. What I found was illuminating. Credit card statements showing charges at designer stores, high-end electronics shops, luxury restaurants, thousands of dollars worth, all while they claimed to be struggling financially. Text messages on an old phone Stephanie had left in her nightstand drawer. Conversations with her friends about how Dad's finally mellowing out, how easy it is to manage him now that Mom's gone, how they were playing the long game for the inheritance. The inheritance. They'd been waiting for me to die so they could claim my house. That's what this was about. That's why they'd stayed, why they'd tolerated me, why they'd kept the rent so low. They were investing in their future payout. I photographed everything with my phone, methodically, quietly. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. When they came home that evening, I was in my armchair reading, same as always. "Hey," Stephanie said, barely glancing at me. "We're ordering Thai food. You want anything?" "No, thank you." Jared didn't even acknowledge my presence, just went straight upstairs, his phone glued to his hand. I turned a page in my book and smiled to myself. Let them think I was defeated. Let them think the locket was the final blow. Let them get comfortable in their certainty. Because I was finally seeing clearly. And what I saw wasn't just their cruelty. It was their absolute confidence that they'd gotten away with it. They hadn't. They'd just been given enough rope to hang themselves, and I was going to hand them more. The morning of my appointment with Richard Bennett, the notary, I woke up before dawn, couldn't sleep. Too much running through my mind. I made coffee and sat in my study, reviewing the documents one more time. The property deed was remarkably detailed. Eleanor's grandmother, Margaret Fitzgerald, had purchased the commercial building in 1985 for $340,000. 2 years later, she'd transferred it to Eleanor, her only grandchild. The deed included survey maps, tax assessor information, and a title insurance policy that had somehow remained active. The bank certificate was simpler but equally significant. The $47,000 deposit had been placed in a trust account, with Eleanor as the sole beneficiary. Interest had been accruing for 38 years. Downstairs, I heard Jared's alarm go off, followed by the sound of the shower running. Their morning routine, Jared first, always, because his time was more important than Stephanie's. She'd told me that once, years ago, making it sound like a joke. It wasn't. I waited until they'd both left for work before I got ready, put on my good suit, the navy one I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral. If I was going to claim $1 million property, I should look the part. Bennett's office was in a professional building near the courthouse, clean, organized, walls lined with legal references and framed certifications. Richard Bennett himself was in his late 50s, gray-haired, with the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades dealing with sensitive documents. "Mr. Bishop, please sit down." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "You mentioned estate documents." I handed him the deed and certificate, along with Eleanor's note. He put on reading glasses and examined each page with meticulous attention, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. "Mr. Bishop, I need to ask you some questions. When did your wife pass away?" "A year ago, February." "And you're only finding these documents now?" "They were hidden in a locket, a very well-hidden compartment that I didn't know existed until earlier this week." He nodded slowly. "These appear to be authentic. The deed is properly notarized, the signatures match the records I can access, and the property description corresponds to a real address. However, there's a significant complication." My stomach tightened. What kind of complication? The property was never formally transferred through probate when Mrs. Fitzgerald, Eleanor's grandmother, passed away. According to these documents, the deed was executed, but it looks like it wasn't properly recorded with the county. That means, technically, the property might still be registered under the grandmother's name in some databases, even though Eleanor had legal ownership through this deed. Can that be fixed? Yes, but it requires going through the probate court system. You'll need an attorney who specializes in estate law. I can authenticate these documents, provide sworn statements about their legitimacy, but the legal work is beyond my scope. How long would that take? If everything goes smoothly, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month, if there are complications, disputed claims, tax issues, title problems, it could take longer. And the cost? For my services, $800 for complete authentication and notarization. For an attorney, you're looking at $5,000 to $10,000, depending on complexity. I thought about the $47,000 bank certificate. More than enough to cover legal fees. Let's do it, whatever it takes. I'll need a few days to complete my authentication. In the meantime, contact this attorney. He handed me a business card. "David Stone. He's one of the best estate lawyers in Portland. Tell him I sent you." I shook his hand and left with my documents, now officially authenticated and notarized, and a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. David Stone's office was even more impressive than Bennett's. Corner suite, 14th floor, windows overlooking the Willamette River. The receptionist informed me that Mr. Stone was in court, but could see me the following Monday. I scheduled the appointment and went home. Jared and Stephanie were in the living room, arguing about something. Their voices cut off when I walked in. "Everything okay?" I asked mildly. "Fine," Jared said curtly. "Just dealing with some stuff." I nodded and went to my study. Through the walls, I could hear their conversation resume in hushed, angry tones. Money problems, from what I could gather. The Paris trip was more expensive than they'd planned. Jared's startup wasn't paying as well as he'd claimed. Good. Let them stress. Let them feel the squeeze. Over the next several days, I fell into a pattern. During the day, while they were at work, I prepared. I organized all the documents Bennett had notarized. I researched the property at 518 S.W. Morrison Street online. It was currently occupied by 3 commercial tenants, a coffee shop, a boutique law firm, and a graphic design agency. According to public records, the building was generating rental income, but that income was apparently going into some kind of administrative limbo because the ownership records were unclear. In the evenings, I played the role of defeated old man, quiet, unobtrusive, staying out of their way. I noticed they'd gotten more brazen, leaving their mess everywhere, using my credit card without asking. I discovered 2 charges at Target and 1 at a liquor store that I definitely hadn't authorized. Talking about me like I wasn't in the room. "Maybe we should just stop paying rent altogether," Jared said one night, thinking I was asleep upstairs. "What's he gonna do? Evict his own daughter?" "I don't know," Stephanie replied. She sounded uncertain. "He's been acting weird lately, quieter than usual. He's depressed. Old people get like that. He'll snap out of it, or he won't. Either way, we're fine." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to them decide my fate. Or rather, what they thought was my fate. Monday morning arrived. I dressed in the same suit and drove downtown to David Stone's office. Stone was in his early 50s, sharp-featured with the kind of intensity that comes from winning more cases than you lose. He listened to my explanation without interrupting, reviewed Bennett's authentication, examined the original documents. "Mr. Bishop, I'm going to be direct with you. This is a complex case, but it's absolutely viable. The property is valuable. Current market estimate for that building is between $1.2 and $1.5 million. The rental income, once we establish clear ownership, should be around $8,000 to $8,500 per month." My heart hammered in my chest. Over $1 million, just sitting there, waiting. "What do we need to do?" "File a petition with the probate court to confirm your wife's ownership through the original deed. Then transfer that ownership to you as her surviving spouse. We'll need to deal with any back taxes, liens, or claims. Given that the property has been in administrative limbo, there may be accumulated issues. My retainer is $5,000, with additional costs billed hourly." I thought about the bank certificate. If we can access that trust account Eleanor's grandmother set up, will that be sufficient to cover costs? "More than sufficient, but we'll need to establish your right to those funds first, which is part of the same process." "Then let's proceed." We spent the next 2 hours going through details, signing documents, establishing timelines. Stone was thorough, asking questions about Eleanor's family history, her grandmother's estate, any potential rival claims. "One more thing," he said as I was leaving. "Your wife's note mentioned she kept this secret. Any idea why?" I thought about Eleanor's words. I never wanted money to define us. She valued what we built together more than what we inherited separately, I said. She didn't want wealth to change who we were. Stone nodded. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. I'm sorry for your loss." I drove home with a folder full of legal documents and a court date set for 3 weeks out. When I walked in, Jared was in the kitchen eating cereal straight from the box. My cereal? From my pantry. Bought with my money. He barely glanced at me. "Where were you?" "Dressed up like it's church or something." "Just handling some personal matters," I said. "Yeah? What kind of matters?" His tone was mocking, challenging. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd sold my wife's locket for pocket change, who'd called it trash, who thought I was too old and broken to fight back. The kind that don't concern you, I said calmly. Something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion, maybe. But it passed quickly, replaced by his usual arrogance. Whatever, old man. Just remember, rent's due next week. We'll get it to you when we can. I went to my study and closed the door. Through the window, I could see the afternoon sun hitting the oak tree in the backyard, the one Eleanor and I had planted when Stephanie was born. And that's when I understood exactly how to repay them. Not with anger or confrontation, but with the same weapon they'd used against me. Patience, calculation, and the element of surprise. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they'd won. They were wrong on both counts. 3 weeks passed in careful preparation. David Stone filed the probate petition, and the court scheduled a hearing. Meanwhile, I played my role perfectly, the quiet, defeated old man shuffling around his own house. But behind the scenes, everything was moving. The bank certificate Eleanor's grandmother had set up was real and accessible. The funds, with accumulated interest over 38 years, totaled $63,400, more than enough to cover all legal fees and then some. The property verification came back clean. The building at 518 S.W. Morrison Street was generating exactly what Stone predicted, $8,400 per month in rental income from 3 commercial tenants. That income had been going into an escrow account pending ownership clarification, which meant there was already $420,000 sitting there, waiting for the rightful owner to claim it. Me. I was the rightful owner. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I wore my best suit, the charcoal one Eleanor had always said made me look distinguished. David Stone met me outside the courthouse, briefcase in hand, confidence in his stride. "Ready for this?" he asked. "More than ready." The proceeding took 45 minutes. The judge reviewed the documents, asked clarifying questions about Eleanor's grandmother's estate, verified the chain of ownership. Stone presented Richard Bennett's notarized authentication, the original deed, Eleanor's note. "Mr. Bishop," the judge said finally, "I'm satisfied that these documents establish clear ownership. The property at 518 Southwest Morrison Street is hereby transferred to your name as the legal heir of Eleanor Fitzgerald Bishop. You'll receive the official certificate within 7 business days." I walked out of that courthouse owning $1,350,000 in commercial real estate. Just like that. A month ago, I'd been a retired teacher living on a modest pension, tolerating abuse from my son-in-law. Now I was a property owner with passive income exceeding $100,000 per year. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jared had sold the locket for $450. His greed had cost him access to more wealth than he'd see in a lifetime. But I wasn't ready to tell him yet. Not quite. First, I needed to make my position clear in a different way. That evening, I called Jared and Stephanie into the living room. They came reluctantly, Jared with his usual annoyed expression, Stephanie looking nervous. They'd been fighting more lately. I could hear them through the walls, arguing about money, about the rent I'd demanded, about their Paris trip that had drained their savings. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk." Jared sprawled on the couch like he owned it. "If this is about the rent again—" "It is," I interrupted. "I've been more than generous over the years. $400 a month when comparable rentals in this neighborhood go for $2,000 or more. That ends now." Stephanie's eyes widened. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the rent increases to $2,100 per month, effective immediately, or you have 60 days to find other accommodations." The color drained from Jared's face. "You can't be serious." "I'm absolutely serious. You're adults. You have jobs. You can afford market rate, or you can move somewhere you can afford." "We can't afford $2,100 a month." Jared's voice rose. "You know we can't. Where are we supposed to get that kind of money?" I met his eyes calmly. "That's not my problem, Jared. You made your choices. The locket you sold for $450, the one you called trash, that helped me understand something important." His expression flickered with confusion. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It helped me understand the real value of things, and of people. You valued that locket at $450 and a flight upgrade to Paris. Now I'm valuing our arrangement at its true market worth. Stephanie was crying now, her hands trembling. Dad, please, we can't just leave. Where would we go? I don't know, sweetheart, but you should have thought about that before you let your husband sell my property without permission. It was just an old piece of jewelry, Jared snapped. Stop being dramatic about it. I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. You have two options. Pay market rent or leave. Those are your choices. I suggest you decide quickly. Jared jumped to his feet, his face red. This is insane. You're throwing out your own daughter over some sentimental garbage? No, I said quietly. You threw out my trust and respect for airline points. I'm simply adjusting our business arrangement accordingly. You have until the end of the week to decide. I walked to my study and closed the door, leaving them in shocked silence. Through the wall, I heard their argument erupt. Stephanie sobbing, Jared shouting about the old man finally losing it, about their rights, about how they'd find a lawyer. Let them try. I had documentation of everything. The original rental agreement at $400. The utility bills in my name that they'd never contributed to. The credit card charges Jared had made without permission. I discovered 3 more, totaling another $800. 2 days later, Jared actually did hire a lawyer. I know because the attorney called me. Some bargain rate guy named Marcus Webb, who'd apparently taken Jared's $800 retainer without properly reviewing the case. Mr. Bishop, this is Marcus Webb, representing Jared Cox. My client informs me you're attempting to illegally evict him and his wife from your property. Your client is misinformed, I said pleasantly. I'm not evicting anyone. I'm adjusting the rent to market rate, which is well within my rights as the property owner. Your client signed a month-to-month rental agreement 4 years ago that specifically allows for rent adjustments with 30 days' notice. There was a pause. I see. And you've provided that notice in writing? I have. Would you like me to send you a copy? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Bishop, perhaps there's room for negotiation here. What if my client agreed to, say, $1,200 per month? Market rate is $2,100. That's my final offer. Sir, they simply cannot afford. Then they should seek housing within their budget. I'm sure there are plenty of options in the greater Portland area. Good day, Mr. Webb. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. In control. Not vindictive exactly, but certainly not a pushover anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched them squirm. Jared spent hours on his laptop, searching rental listings, his face growing more panicked with each passing day. Studio apartments in decent areas started at $1,600. Anything comparable to their current situation, 2 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, ran $1,800 to $2,500. Stephanie tried appealing to me emotionally, knocked on my study door one evening, tears in her eyes. Dad, please, can't we work something out? I know Jared was wrong about the locket, but we're family. Doesn't that mean anything? It used to, I said, but family means mutual respect, Stephanie. When's the last time either of you showed me respect? When's the last time Jared spoke to me without calling me old man or treating me like I'm senile? She had no answer. You made your choice when you stood by and let him sell Eleanor's locket, when you agreed with him that it was just trash. Actions have consequences. The deadline came. They took out a personal loan. I saw the paperwork Jared left on the kitchen counter. $12,000 at 18% interest to cover rent for the next several months while they figured things out. They paid the $2,100, but barely, and the strain was showing in everything they did. That's when I noticed something interesting. Jared started dressing better for work, leaving earlier, staying later. He was angling for a promotion or a raise, I realized, trying to earn his way out of the financial hole they'd dug, and I started planning my next move. The following month brought changes I could see and others I could only sense. Jared and Stephanie were bleeding money. The $2,100 rent plus utilities, which they were now required to pay half of, another $350 per month, plus their loan payment, car insurance, food, and Stephanie's student loan debt. I didn't need to see their bank statements to know they were drowning. But what fascinated me was watching Jared adapt. He was smarter than I'd given him credit for in his own calculating way. He started bringing work home, networking aggressively, schmoozing his boss, the desperate energy of a man trying to save himself. I, meanwhile, had become someone new, or perhaps someone I'd always been underneath the accommodating exterior. I started receiving calls from David Stone about the Morrison Street property. The rental income was now flowing directly to my account. First payment, $8,400. Then another the following month. Then another. I bought myself new clothes. Not expensive, but well made. Started going to a barber instead of cutting my own hair. Joined the Historical Society I'd always wanted to join but never had the funds for. One afternoon I was on the phone with the property management company when Jared came home early. I didn't hear him come in, didn't realize he was in the hallway outside my study. Yes, that's correct, I was saying. The tenants on Morrison Street have been excellent. No issues with payment, no maintenance complaints. I appreciate you handling everything so professionally. I hung up and turned to find Jared standing in the doorway, his face pale. Morrison Street? He said. What tenants? I looked at him calmly. Excuse me. You said tenants on Morrison Street. What are you talking about? Do you own other property? This was the moment. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the sudden hope that maybe, just maybe, the old man had money after all. Money they could access. I have some investments, I said carefully. Nothing that concerns you. But Jared's mind was racing now. I could practically see the gears turning. Investments? What kind of investments? You're a retired teacher. You don't have... He stopped, realization dawning. The locket. You said it helped you understand value. Did you find something? Did that antique dealer pay you more? The locket situation is resolved, I said. As I said, it helped me gain perspective. What does that mean? His voice was rising. What did you find? Nothing that concerns you, Jared. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make. I closed the study door in his face. Over the next week, I noticed him watching me, really watching me, noting when I left the house in my better clothes, paying attention to my phone calls, studying my mail. He hired someone to follow me. Amateur move. I spotted the guy immediately. White sedan, bad surveillance technique, obvious camera. I called David Stone, who made 2 calls, and had the investigator's license threatened if he didn't cease immediately. Cost Jared $600 for 3 days of useless surveillance. Then Jared tried confrontation. Caught me in the kitchen one morning, planted himself between me and the door. I know you're hiding something, he said. You suddenly have money. You're getting lawyer calls. You're talking about property. What happened with that locket? What did you really find? I poured my coffee slowly, deliberately. I found out what I'm worth, I said, and more importantly, what you're not. His jaw clenched. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. I could make things difficult for you, he said, and there was a threat in his voice now. Start telling people you're mentally declining. Get Stephanie to petition for conservatorship. You're 68, living alone, making erratic financial decisions. I set down my coffee cup and looked at him directly. Try it. Please, try it. I would love to see you attempt to prove mental incompetence against a man who just successfully navigated complex probate proceedings. David Stone would have a field day with that lawsuit. But if you want to waste more money on lawyers who can't help you, be my guest. The color drained from his face. Probate proceedings? What probate proceedings? Again, nothing that concerns you. Enjoy your breakfast, Jared. I walked past him, leaving him standing there with his mouth open. That afternoon, Stephanie came to me. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly. Dad, I need to talk to you. Please. We sat in the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. I'm sorry, she said, and the tears started immediately. About the locket, about everything. Jared said it wasn't worth anything, that you'd never notice it was gone, but I knew it was wrong. I knew it, and I let him do it anyway. Yes, I said simply. You did. I'm sorry, she repeated. Did something happen with it? Jared keeps saying you found something, that you're hiding money. He's obsessed. He spent $600 on a private investigator to follow you. I know. The investigator wasn't very good. Dad, please, just tell me the truth. Was the locket worth something? I considered her. My daughter, who'd chosen her husband over her father repeatedly, who'd watched him demean me for years and said nothing, who'd agreed to sell her mother's locket for a vacation. Jared made an error in judgment, I said finally. He assumed that because something looked old and worn, it had no value. He was wrong. Very wrong. Her eyes widened. How wrong? Wrong enough that you'll be paying market rent for the foreseeable future. Wrong enough that I've learned an important lesson about who I can trust. Dad, I'm not telling you anything more, Stephanie. You made your choice. You stood by while he called me senile, while he stole from me, while he treated me like garbage in my own home. The locket was the final straw, but it wasn't the beginning. You know that. She was crying openly now. I didn't know it was valuable. I swear I didn't know. But you knew it mattered to me. You knew it was all I had left of your mother, and you let him sell it anyway. I stood up. I suggest you and Jared focus on your finances. That loan you took out has a very high interest rate, and I won't be lowering your rent. I left her there, sobbing into her hands. That evening I heard them fighting. Stephanie's voice high and panicked. He knows something about the locket. It was valuable, Jared. You promised me it was worthless. Jared's response was muffled but angry. I sat in my study sipping whiskey, a nice bottle I'd bought myself with my first Morrison Street payment, and smiled. They were finally starting to understand. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to know they'd made a catastrophic mistake, and I was just getting started. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I chose the timing deliberately. End of the work week, when people are tired and their defenses are lower. I sent Jared and Stephanie a formal written notice the week before. Family meeting regarding property matters. Attendance required. Friday, 3 p.m., dining room. Jared tried to refuse. We're not coming to your little power play, old man. Then you'll receive the information from my attorney via certified mail, I replied calmly. Either way, you'll learn the truth. I thought you might prefer to hear it directly. That got his attention. I hired David Stone to attend, along with Richard Bennett, the notary who'd authenticated the documents. Professional witnesses. Everything documented, everything legal. When Friday arrived, I set up the dining room like a boardroom. Documents arranged in neat folders at each place setting. A pitcher of water and glasses. Everything proper and official. Jared and Stephanie arrived looking like they were heading to an execution. Stephanie's hands shook as she sat down. Jared tried to maintain his usual arrogance, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew something was coming. David Stone sat to my right, Richard Bennett to my left. Two professional men in suits, briefcases open, legal pads ready. The formality of it clearly rattled Jared. What is this? He demanded. Why do you need lawyers for a family conversation? Because this isn't a conversation, I said. It's a disclosure. I slid the first folder across the table to Stephanie, the second to Jared. Open them. Stephanie's hands trembled as she lifted the cover. Inside was the property deed for 518 S.W. Morrison Street, the bank certificate, Eleanor's note, court documents confirming my ownership, tax assessments showing the property's value at $1,350,000. I watched their faces as they read. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Stephanie went pale, all color draining from her cheeks. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. Jared's reaction was more dramatic. His eyes widened, scanning the documents again and again, as if they might change on the second or third reading. His hands started shaking. The paper rustled audibly. I want you to understand what happened, I said, my voice calm and measured. The locket Jared sold for $450 contained a hidden compartment. Inside that compartment were legal documents showing that Eleanor inherited commercial property from her grandmother in 1987. No, Jared whispered. This can't be. The property, I continued, ignoring him, is a 4,200 square foot commercial building in downtown Portland. Current market value, $1,350,000. Monthly rental income from 3 commercial tenants, $8,400. Stephanie made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. If you hadn't sold the locket, Jared, I would never have taken it to Margaret Holland's antique shop. She's the one who discovered the secret compartment. In a way, you saved me from living in poverty for the rest of my life, unaware that I owned a fortune. So thank you. The irony in my voice was sharp enough to cut. Jared's face had gone from pale to red. This is impossible. That locket was it was old junk. There's no way. The documents are notarized and court certified, Richard Bennett said, speaking for the first time. His voice was professional, clinical. I personally authenticated them. The probate court confirmed Mr. Bishop's ownership 3 months ago. 3 months? Stephanie's voice cracked. You've known for 3 months? Since late March, I confirmed. Right around the time I increased your rent to market rate. Jared slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. You had no right to keep this from us. Stephanie is your daughter. This should be family property. Family property? I leaned back in my chair, my voice cold. You called my wife's locket trash. You sold it without permission for airline points. You stood in my kitchen and told me to move on from my grief. That's your understanding of family. But $1 million? Jared's voice was climbing, desperation bleeding through. You can't just keep it all. Stephanie deserves her share. She's your daughter. David Stone cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Cox, under Oregon law, the property belonged to Eleanor Bishop exclusively. It passes to her surviving spouse, Mr. Bishop, through standard inheritance laws. There is no legal basis for any claim you or Mrs. Cox might make. That's not fair, Jared shouted. He was fully panicking now. I could see it. The reality was sinking in. He'd thrown away access to generational wealth for a Paris vacation. We live here. We're family. You have to share it. I don't have to do anything, I said quietly. Just like you didn't have to respect me. Didn't have to ask before selling my property. Didn't have to treat me like a human being in my own home. Stephanie was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If you'd known it was valuable, you wouldn't have let him sell it, I finished. But you knew it mattered to me. You knew it was all I had left of your mother, and that wasn't enough to stop you. It was wrong, she sobbed. I know it was wrong. But we didn't know about the property. We can't be punished for something we didn't know. You're not being punished for the property, I said. You're experiencing the natural consequences of treating me like I was worthless. The property revelation just helps you understand exactly how much your greed cost you. Jared was staring at the documents, his brain clearly trying to find an angle, a loophole, something he could exploit. We could sue. Negligent something. Failure to disclose family assets. David Stone actually smiled at that. Please do. I would enjoy that case very much. You sold Mr. Bishop's property without permission. You've been paying below market rent for years while contributing nothing to household expenses, and you want to sue him for not telling you about assets that you have no legal claim to? Yes, please hire an attorney. I'll prepare the countersuit for theft and harassment. The fight went out of Jared like air from a punctured tire. He slumped in his chair, still staring at the numbers. $1,350,000. Gone. Sold for $450,000. What happens now? Stephanie asked quietly. Now you continue paying your rent on time, I said. You continue living your lives, and you accept that your choices have consequences. The rent, Jared said, his voice hollow. That's why you raised it. You wanted to hurt us. No, I corrected. I raised it because it's my house, and you should pay what it's worth. Just like that locket was Eleanor's, and you had no right to sell it regardless of its value. I stood up, gathering my copies of the documents. This meeting is concluded. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. As Stone and Bennett packed their briefcases, I looked at Jared and Stephanie one last time. The Morrison Street property generates more income in 1 month than you pay in rent for an entire year, I said. Every month I will collect that money and remember that you thought I was too old and stupid to matter, and every month you'll know exactly what you threw away. I left them sitting there, surrounded by documents that spelled out their spectacular failure in precise legal terms. Behind me, I heard Stephanie's sobs intensify, heard Jared cursing under his breath, a continuous stream of profanity directed at himself, at me, at the universe. In my study, I poured another whiskey and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. They knew now. They understood. And there wasn't a single thing they could do about it. The weekend after the revelation was quiet. Too quiet. I'd expected immediate retaliation, but Jared and Stephanie barely emerged from their room. I heard them talking late into the night, voices rising and falling in urgent discussion. I remained alert. Cornered animals are dangerous, and I'd just cornered them with information that meant they'd made $1 million mistake. The first strike came the following Tuesday. A lawyer's letter arrived via courier. Brian Carter, attorney at law. Aggressive letterhead, threatening language. I read it with my morning coffee, almost amused by the audacity. The letter claimed negligent custody of family inheritance and demanded Stephanie receive 50% of the property's value as Eleanor's daughter. It cited obscure Oregon statutes about family property rights and threatened immediate legal action. I called David Stone. "How fast can you demolish this?" I asked. "I'll have it done by end of day. This is amateur work. There's no legal basis whatsoever." "Good. Send your response, and bill them for your time as well." "With pleasure." That afternoon, Jared came home early. I heard him in the kitchen slamming cabinets. He knew Stone had responded. The legal avenue was already blocked, but he wasn't done trying. Over the next 2 weeks, Jared mounted a desperate campaign. He hired a property appraiser, some friend of a friend willing to work cheap, and tried to argue that the Morrison Street building was overvalued, that my assessment was fraudulent. Richard Bennett destroyed that argument with his original authentication and 3 independent appraisals that confirmed the $1,350,000 valuation. Actually, 2 of them came in higher. Jared tried to dig up dirt on the property acquisition, suggesting Eleanor had somehow obtained it illegally. That went nowhere fast. The 1987 deed was legitimate. Probate had been properly executed, and questioning it just made him look desperate and foolish. Then he tried a different approach. One evening he knocked on my study door. When I opened it, he looked almost humble. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something that might have been sincerity, if I didn't know him better. "Theodore, can we talk? Just the 2 of us?" I gestured to a chair. He sat down, hands clasped between his knees. "I want to apologize," he started. "Really apologize, not just... Look, I know I've been terrible to you. Disrespectful, ungrateful. The locket was the last straw, I get it. But we're family, right? Can't we find a way past this?" "What are you proposing?" "Let us buy out a percentage of the property. Not half, I know that's unreasonable. But 10%, $135,000. We could get a loan, pay you over time. You'd still own the vast majority, but we'd have something. A stake." I studied him. He looked sincere. Desperate, but sincere. "No," I said simply. "Come on, be reasonable." "Be reasonable?" I let some anger show. "You sold my wife's locket for a flight upgrade and told me it was trash. You lived in my house for years, paying 1/4 of market rent, and spent that entire time treating me like I was senile and worthless. Now you want me to sell you a piece of property that you only know exists because you stole from me. I didn't steal. You took my property without permission and sold it. That's theft, Jared. The only reason I haven't pressed charges is because Stephanie is my daughter." He stood up, the humble mask slipping. "You're punishing us for one mistake." "No, I'm protecting what's mine from people who've proven they can't be trusted. If you want something from me, you'll earn it the same way I earned this property, through hard work and patience, not through manipulation and theft." "100,000 then," he said quickly. 75. Come on, work with us here." "You don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. You're not buying anything from me. Not now, not ever." "You spiteful old..." He caught himself, taking a breath. Fine. We'll manage without you." But they weren't managing. I could see it in how they lived. The rent checks started arriving late. First by a few days, then by a week. Each time, I documented it. Sent formal late notices. Added late fees per our rental agreement. They stopped buying groceries. Started eating cheap takeout. Stephanie's car developed a problem with the transmission. I heard her crying on the phone about the repair quote. They couldn't afford to fix it. The loan they'd taken out to cover rent was eating them alive. 18% interest, I'd learned from documents Jared had carelessly left on the printer. They were paying $2,100 in rent, plus $450 in loan payments, plus utilities, plus everything else. Meanwhile, my Morrison Street income arrived like clockwork, $8,400 every month. I opened a separate savings account just to watch it grow. Then Jared made his final mistake. He stopped paying rent entirely. The first month I'd been willing to overlook with penalties. The second month I sent a formal notice. By the third week of the second missed payment, I filed for eviction. Oregon law is clear on this. 30 days notice for non-payment, then court proceedings. David Stone handled everything. Jared tried to argue the eviction was retaliatory, that I was punishing them for the lawsuit. Stone produced our rental agreement, payment history showing chronic late payments even before the lawsuit, and the documented 3 months of my attempting to work with them. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Eviction granted. Defendants have 14 days to vacate the property. I watched Stephanie cry in the courtroom, watched Jared's hands ball into fists, his face red with impotent rage. "You can't do this," he shouted at me outside the courthouse. "We have nowhere to go." "You had years to save money by paying minimal rent," I replied. "You chose to spend it on other things. That's not my responsibility." "She's your daughter." "She's a grown woman who made her choices. Time to live with them." 14 days later, I stood in the doorway as they loaded their belongings into a U-Haul. They'd found a studio apartment across town, $1,400 per month, half the space they'd had in my house. Stephanie tried one last time as she passed me with a box of her clothes. "Dad, please, I know we hurt you. I know we were wrong. But this is too much." "No," I said quietly. "This is exactly enough. You'll understand someday that the hardest lessons are usually the most valuable." She didn't respond, just loaded her box, and went back for another. When they finally drove away, I stood on my porch and watched the U-Haul disappear down the street. Then I went inside, locked the door, and started planning what to do with all this empty space. Maybe I'd rent it out to someone who appreciated what they had. Or maybe I'd just enjoy the silence. The quiet lasted exactly 3 days. Then I got a call from David Stone that changed everything again. "Theodore, we need to talk about something my paralegal discovered while organizing the eviction files." "What is it?" "Credit card fraud, your card ending in 4782. There are charges going back 2 years that you didn't authorize. Hotel stays, restaurant bills, electronics purchases. The paralegal flagged them because some of the charges occurred on dates when you were provably somewhere else." I pulled up my online banking, started scrolling through statements I'd mostly ignored, trusting that the household charges were legitimate. And there they were. Hundreds of small transactions I'd never questioned because they seemed plausible. A dinner here, a purchase there. But when you added them up, how much are we talking about? Preliminary estimate, around $6,700. My hand tightened on the phone. $6,700. Stolen. Not borrowed. Stolen. Because Jared had never asked, never intended to repay. Can we prove it was him? Several of the charges have his name on the receipts. He wasn't even careful about it. I think he assumed you'd never notice or never care enough to do anything. The old man. Too senile to track his own finances. Too weak to fight back. "File a police report," I said. "Every charge, every receipt. I want documentation." "Theodore, you should know. This could result in criminal charges, potentially jail time." "Good," I heard Stone pause. "You're sure? This is your daughter's husband. He's a thief who thought I was too old and stupid to notice. File the report." The investigation moved faster than I expected. The detective assigned to the case, a tired-looking woman named Rita Morales, reviewed the evidence Stone provided and called Jared in for questioning. I wasn't there, but Stone got the recording through Discovery. I listened to it in my study, headphones on, hearing Jared's voice crack as he tried to explain. "I thought he wouldn't notice," Jared said, and I could hear the panic underneath his words. "He's old. He doesn't really look at his statements. I was going to pay it back eventually. I just needed—" "You needed to commit fraud against an elderly family member?" Detective Morales' voice was flat, unimpressed. "It wasn't fraud. We lived together. It's like a family expense." "Did Mr. Bishop authorize these purchases?" Silence. "Mr. Cox, did he authorize them?" "No, but—" "Then it's theft. Credit card fraud is a Class A misdemeanor in Oregon." "We're moving forward with charges." The call came from Stephanie 2 hours after Jared was formally charged. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Dad, please, please drop the charges. He made a mistake. He's sorry." "He's sorry he got caught. They're saying he could lose his job. This could go on his record. Please, for me? Drop it. No. Dad, she was sobbing now. He's my husband. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to live with the consequences of the choices you both made. You chose to stand by him when he stole from me, when he disrespected me, when he sold Eleanor's locket. Those were your choices, Stephanie. Now face them. I hate you, she whispered. I'm sorry you feel that way, but the charges stand. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September. Jared stood before the judge, looking like he'd aged 10 years. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked. Stephanie sat in the gallery, staring at her hands. The prosecutor laid out the case efficiently. $6,700 in unauthorized charges over 2 years, 43 separate transactions. Clear intent, clear pattern, clear guilt. Jared's public defender tried to argue financial hardship, family circumstances, intention to repay. The judge wasn't moved. Mr. Cox, you systematically defrauded a family member over an extended period. The court finds you guilty of credit card fraud and theft. Sentence is 100 hours of community service, full restitution of $6,700, plus court costs of $1,200 and 2 years probation. I watched Jared's face as the sentence was read. Watched the moment he realized his careful manipulation, his assumption that I was too weak to matter, had destroyed him. His hands were shaking. His lawyer had to steady him. Outside the courthouse, Stephanie tried one last time. Are you happy now? Her eyes were red, her makeup ruined. You've destroyed everything. Our home, Jared's career, our future. All because you couldn't forgive one mistake. One mistake? I kept my voice level. The locket was one mistake. The theft was systematic fraud. The disrespect was 6 years of calculated abuse. You're confusing forgiveness with being a doormat, Stephanie. I forgive you for being weak, but I won't pretend there shouldn't be consequences. I'll never forgive you for this. That's your choice. Just like it was your choice to let him sell your mother's locket. Your choice to enable his theft. Your choice to treat me like I was worthless. Choices have consequences, sweetheart. You're just learning that lesson later than most. She walked away without another word. David Stone appeared at my elbow. That was harder than your letting on. Yes, I admitted, but it was necessary. You know the property on Morrison Street is still generating income. You're financially secure for the rest of your life. I know. What will you do with it all? I thought about Eleanor, about her note. Use it wisely. About the life we'd built without money defining us. I have some ideas, I said, starting with making sure no one ever questions my mental competence again. Stone smiled. I don't think anyone will make that mistake twice. A week later, the eviction became final. Their 14 days had passed. I changed the locks and started cleaning out their rooms. I found things they'd left behind in their hurry. Stephanie's old yearbooks, photos from when she was young, before Jared, evidence of the girl she used to be. I packed them carefully in a box and put them in storage. Someday, maybe, she'd want them back. But not today. Today was about moving forward. The house felt different without them, larger, quieter, mine. I spent a week just enjoying the space, reading in the living room without interruption, cooking meals without Jared's commentary, sleeping soundly without their late-night arguments bleeding through the walls. Then I started making changes. The first call I made was to a young couple I'd met at the Historical Society, both teachers, struggling to find affordable housing in Portland. Mark and Jennifer Chen, good people who appreciated quality when they saw it. I have 2 bedrooms available, I told them. $1,300 per month, all utilities included. Month-to-month lease. No long-term commitment required. Jennifer's voice cracked with relief. That's half what we're paying now. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'd rather have good tenants who respect the space than maximum profit. They moved in 3 weeks later. The house came alive again with better energy, conversations about literature and history, respectful questions about my book collection, genuine gratitude for reasonable rent. This was what family was supposed to feel like. The Morrison Street property was next on my list. I'd been collecting that $8,400 monthly watching the account grow, but Eleanor's note kept echoing. Use it wisely. Early October, I met with a commercial real estate agent. The market had climbed. The building was now valued at $1,420,000. Sell it, I said. Are you certain? The rental income is excellent. I'm certain. I have other plans for the capital. The sale closed quickly. After taxes and fees, I walked away with $1,180,000. On what would have been Eleanor's 67th birthday, I established the Eleanor Fitzgerald Bishop Educational Fund. $300,000 administered through the Portland Historical Society, providing annual scholarships to students studying history. The remaining $880,000 went into conservative investments, enough to ensure I'd never worry about money again, enough to maintain my independence, enough to prove that Jared and Stephanie had gambled away more than they could comprehend. The letter arrived in mid-October, Stephanie's handwriting on the envelope slightly shaky. I opened it standing by the window, autumn leaves falling in the backyard. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I need you to know I understand now. Not just about the money, though thinking about what Jared threw away makes me physically sick, but about the disrespect, the cruelty, the way we treated you like you didn't matter. I was so wrapped up in keeping Jared happy that I forgot who I was, who you raised me to be. I'm not asking for anything, not money, not reconciliation. Just wanted you to know I finally understand what Mom tried to tell me in that letter I never showed you. I'm sorry. Stephanie. I read it 3 times, set it on my desk. Thought about the daughter who used to ask me questions about pharaohs and emperors. Wondered if she was still in there somewhere, trying to find her way back. I wrote a single line in response. Apology accepted. Trust is earned over years, not moments. Perhaps someday. Short, honest, fair. I didn't mail it immediately, just left it on the desk while I thought. The final piece of the puzzle arrived from David Stone via email, an invoice for the credit card fraud case, with a note. Jared Cox has completed his first community service hours. 47 more to go. Restitution payment plan established at $275 per month for 2 years. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled. $275 per month. The kind of systematic payment Jared hated. The kind that would remind him every single month for 2 years exactly what his greed and disrespect had cost him. Perfect. That evening I stood in my workshop, the room I'd reclaimed from being Jared's home gym. My restoration projects surrounded me. The 19th century dresser I'd been working on was nearly complete, its wood grain finally showing through layers of old varnish. On the wall I'd hung the photograph from 1982. Eleanor and me, young and in love, standing in front of this very house on the day we'd bought it. Her smile was radiant, her hand in mine. Elle, I said quietly to the photograph, you were right about so many things. About Jared, about Stephanie, about what really matters. And that last gift you left me, I used it wisely. Some went to ensure students can study what we loved. Some went to secure my future, and some went to teaching 2 people a lesson they desperately needed. I picked up my tools, returned to work on the dresser. Outside, the autumn evening was settling in, gold and orange leaves drifting past the window. My phone buzzed, a text from Mark, my new tenant. Jennifer made cookies. Can we bring you some? Want to hear about the Ottoman Empire exhibit you mentioned? I smiled and typed back, come on down. This was what life was supposed to be. Respect, appreciation, people who understood value beyond dollars. I thought about Jared in his studio apartment, calculating his monthly budget, scraping together community service hours, watching every penny. Thought about Stephanie learning what it meant to make difficult choices, to live with consequences. I wasn't cruel. I hadn't destroyed them. I'd simply stopped letting them destroy me. And Eleanor's final gift, hidden in that locket Jared had called trash, had given me the means to do it with style. I ran my hand over the smooth wood of the dresser, feeling the grain beneath my fingers. Restoration was about patience, understanding, seeing the beauty that others overlooked, just like the locket had been, just like I had been. But no one would overlook me again. I was 68 years old. I owned my home free and clear. I had income, investments, and independence. I had good tenants who respected me. I had the satisfaction of watching justice served, and most importantly, I had learned Eleanor's final lesson. Never let anyone else decide your worth. The doorbell rang, Mark and Jennifer with their cookies and questions. I set down my tools and headed upstairs, leaving my workshop behind. Tomorrow I'd finish the dresser. Next week I'd start on a Victorian chair that needed repair. But tonight I'd enjoy good company, good conversation, and the quiet peace of a house that was finally, truly mine. Outside, autumn leaves danced in the Portland twilight. Inside, I was home, and I'd never been happier. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.